Hi, I'm Alessio Iacona from Blocks for Bits. We are Intruders TV and we're attending the Web 2.0 Expo in Berlin. Today I have the pleasure to interview Mr. Tim O'Reilly, which is founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media Publisher. Thank you for joining us, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, glad to be with you. Thanks for coming to the conference.
My first question is inspired by the very topic of this expo. What is the power of the Web 2.0 and how should we use it?
Well, you have to understand the fundamental idea of Web 2.0 is that the internet has become the platform for software development. And just as the personal computer becoming the platform in the 1980s changed the computer industry, the idea behind this conference and the name Web 2.0 was simply that the web is going to change the rules of business. It's going to change who wins, who loses, and why. And the center of what I came to when I thought about that, of what was the fundamental change that this network as platform was going to drive in the industry, it was that software was no longer going to become the source of competitive advantage per se. It was instead going to be huge databases driven by network effects. And that's the heart of my thinking about Web 2.0. If you look at every one of the players who succeeded after the in the first wave of the web and the companies that have come along later and succeeded, they all have learned to harness their users to actually build a product that gets better the more people use it. And that's really the secret of Web 2.0.
I understand. Today, a worldwide financial crisis is hitting the markets. How do you think this is going to affect the web economy and the thousands of startups fighting to emerge from Web 2.0?
Well, I have to say, I think it will probably accelerate a process that was going to happen anyway. And that process is the winnowing away of startups that don't have a compelling business proposition. And you have to remember, this is not new. This happens in every technology revolution. Everything I think about with regard to the evolution of technology simply comes from watching the cycles repeat themselves. I was around in the early 80s when the personal computer revolution took off. And there were thousands of companies making PCs, making software for PCs. 10 years later, there was, there were a half dozen big PC makers. There was Intel, and there was Microsoft. And so why do we think it's going to be different this time around? When you have a new revolution, it starts with lots of great ideas, lots of companies. And most of them go out of business or they get acquired. So what happened to all those PC companies? Many of them went out of business. Some of them grew to be quite large. But if you look at all those little software startups, they're all now part of Computer Associates or part of Symantec, which was the roll-up play. So there's going to be a big roll-up play, and it may be companies like Yahoo and Google, and Microsoft buying startups. But it could just be somebody like Symantec, which was one of the little guys who figured out that they would just get bigger by acquiring everybody else. But we're in the consolidation phase of Web 2.0 with or without the financial crisis. So in some ways, what the financial crisis presents us with is an opportunity to think about fresh, new problems that this industry can tackle. So I actually think it's a good thing because it'll clear out the dead wood faster. And then we get back to basics and we say, okay, where can we apply the techniques and technologies of Web 2.0 to new real-world problems? And I think we're going to see a new wave of startups that are smarter than all these ones that are just sort of sucking the exhaust of the guys who got there first.
So you see the crisis as an opportunity?
Yes, absolutely.
What does Web 2.0 means for business? How should it be used inside companies? And what executives should be wary of before they start harnessing collective wisdom, as you once said?
Well, I think to this day, most people don't really understand Web 2.0. They still think that it means all the explicit forms of Web 2.0, advertising-based, business models, social media, and the like. But for me, it's all about the shift to understanding data as business advantage and live applications built on live data. And when I say live data, I mean data that's growing by dialogue with its users. And so if you think about, what can a business learn? You think about, well, how do you interact with your customers today? What data do you get from them? And this is why I've been making the point that, Dell, for example, Dell's original Dell.com was probably more Web 2.0 than Dell Idea Storm. Or think about Walmart as a Web 2.0 company. Every time somebody takes something off the shelf, right? That goes into the brain of Walmart in the same way that every time somebody clicks on a link, that goes into the brain of Google, right? Enterprises need to think like Google. They need to think like Walmart. Those are both actually companies in which the entire application is infused with IT. And if you contrast that with, say, your phone company or your bank, these are they deliver software as a service, right? They deliver. They have massive data. That data actually gets better through user interaction, but they haven't really figured out how to make those services live. And so I look at a startup like one I'm involved with, an investor on the board of, Wisabe, which takes credit card data and says every time somebody swipes a credit card, that's a vote for a merchant, just like every time somebody links to a website, that's a link. That's a vote for a site. And they're able to build all these really interesting collective intelligence applications based on bank data. Well, the banks could do that. Your phone company could be building social networks saying, well, we know who you talk to. Why do you have to go ask somebody if they're your friend? I know, because you call them all the time. And those are, I think, way more important than, a business adding a blog or a wiki. They should be thinking about, what data do I have that comes from my interaction with my customers? And how can I build new services for my customers that get better because of that data?
I understand. You lead a company which is both offline and online publisher. The internet is really killing the old media stars, the printed ones above all.
Well, there's certainly challenges in the book business. It hasn't been growing, in recent years. Although, we've actually managed to grow our book business largely by finding other untapped market segments, changing the type of product we offer. But we've also made a major commitment to online publishing, for our books with Safari Books Online, which is now our third largest channel for selling our content. It's a subscription service online. But I think ultimately, for us, what we need to do is to, what we at O'Reilly do, and what I think other publishers need to do, is to say, what job do you really do? And we didn't think the job we do is putting words on paper and, printing lots and lots of books and putting them in bookstores. The job that we do, as we tell it to ourselves, is changing the world by spreading the knowledge of innovators. And that's why, we moved into the events business, for instance, because that was another way to do that job. And when we publish online as well as in print. We now we have a venture fund, so we do investing. Whatever we can do to actually achieve our mission. And I think any old media publisher needs to say, what job are you really doing? If you're a publisher of science fiction, then maybe you should be in computer games, right? Because that fills the same job, entertainment.
Now I'd like to ask you something more personal. How Tim O'Reilly has become Tim O'Reilly, and if he had the chance to begin his life all over again, would he do the same choices?
It's sort of a tough question because I love everything I do. When I was a kid, one of my fantasies was that I would write a science fiction book about somebody able to live multiple lives at once, because you can never fit in enough. And I certainly, I can imagine other things that I would love to be doing besides what I do today. As to how I got here, I just followed my nose. I got out of school. I was doing some writing. I had a friend who was a programmer who got asked to write a manual. I said it'd help him out. One thing led to another. I got into computers. I came to love regular expressions and the power of text editing, programming to be able to do really interesting work with words, and then became a publisher. And then a real turning point for me in terms of probably what people think of me now, with sort of public activism around technology, came from a guy I hired in 1992 named Brian Irwin. He'd been the director of activism for the Sierra Club, and we hired him to do PR for us right about the time we published the book, The Whole Internet User's Guide and Catalog, in 1992. And he said, look, people don't care about books. They care about issues and ideas. So we didn't market the book. We marketed the internet. And we used the book to market the internet. And ever since then, I've just been marketing technology rather than marketing my products. And then the products just kind of ride along behind. Would I do it? What would I do differently? Probably not much.
So you're quite satisfied with your life.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. And what's next in the Web 2.0 revolution? What's the next big thing?
Yeah. I think the next big thing for Web 2.0 ties back to that question I had about, that you asked about Web 2.0 and the enterprise. And that has to do with thinking about collective intelligence and how it can be driven by other data sources than people typing on keyboards. I think this relates to another part of my business. A lot of what we do at O'Reilly is we watch what hackers are doing, and then we say, well, hackers often do it first, who's going to follow? And what we see hackers doing today is playing with stuff, and a huge amount of work going on with sensors. And if you start thinking about sensors in Web 2.0, you start seeing, oh, these collective intelligence applications can be driven by sensors. And location is the first example of that. Now that you've got phones with location built into them, you start saying, oh yeah, okay, applications now know where you are. But it's not from somebody typing in, I'm in Berlin. Your phone just says, he's in Berlin, he's on this street. And not only can the application respond, but also you can build new services against that. So for example, there's a company that we invested in the UK called Path Intelligence that uses the cell phones checking in with the tower just for signal, and it counts people in shopping malls. It's something that, it's sort of a humble application, but one that people used to, periodically they'd send people out and they'd count. It's how they set the rents. How many people walk by your store? Well, now you can set up a couple of wireless stations and just count the cell phones that walk by. And you say, well, 1,000 people went by your store today. And this is a new kind of application. There's another company that's trying to do what Nielsen does in terms of tracking television watching. They're doing it with cell phones. Again, cell phone wakes up every 30 seconds, listens and says, did I hear a commercial? And which one? Because, these collective applications can actually use the phone as an ear. You look at what's happening with programs like Microsoft PhotoSynth, the ability to build 3D models from consumer photos. All of a sudden, the global brain has eyes. So we're moving into a world in which we're going to start having applications that are deriving meaning from all the digital exhaust that we're creating, simply in walking around with devices. And going back to the central idea of Web 2.0, if I were to pick one moment that would be the defining starting point of Web 2.0, would be the invention of PageRank. And the reason is that what PageRank shows us is that there's hidden layers of meaning in digital information. Everybody else was just doing search by looking at the content of documents. And Google realized that there was, oh, wait, the links mean something. And they started sort of finding this additional level of metadata and meaning in who linked to whom. And this idea that a link was a vote. And I think we're going to see that in more and more areas as we gather more data. Somebody will have a breakthrough and they'll say, oh my gosh, what's happening here is that we can build a smarter application because we know how to use this data differently. And I think enterprises will figure that out, and I think clever startups will figure that out.
You bring 4 expos in 4 different parts of the world. What makes the Europe Expo different from the others?
I think in some, well, obviously there's a European sensibility. You have companies that are coming from many different countries, and in each of those countries they need to, for example, to build local language applications that in some sense may be a duplicate of what you see in English language applications elsewhere, but there's a real opportunity, obviously, to say, okay, we're going to have a social network in Spanish, we're going to have a social network in German, and so Xing, for example, has done really well here, and LinkedIn and Facebook and all those guys have got to catch up. But I think there's also this really interesting innovation over here. If you look at, I think mobile is way ahead over here in Europe, and so I think Nokia has done a lot of interesting work. There's some I think there's some fascinating mobile startups coming out. But I think there's definitely a bit of a challenge in Europe. Not in every country do we have the same attitude towards entrepreneurship. I was just in Spain, for example, and was talking with someone, and she was regretting how, if you fail at a startup, you're washed up. You don't have the kind of opportunity that you have in some other countries to try something, fail, try something else. You get a permanent blot on your resume. And I think part of what we're hoping to do here is to encourage that entrepreneurial culture.
You've been observing the internet world very closely since at least 1978. What is the best idea, the best project you saw rising from the internet ecosystem, and of course, what is the worst?
Well, the best idea, clearly, on the internet ecosystem was the World Wide Web itself. I mean, you got to remember that the web was an application once. Back in 1992, there were a bunch of competing information applications, things like Gopher and Waze and the like, and the World Wide Web was the winning application. And it was a brilliant invention, and the fact that Tim Berners-Lee put it into the public domain, made a gift of it to all the rest of us, shouldn't obscure the fact that this was the foundational, invention that made everything else possible. In terms of some of the worst ideas, I think in the first dot-com bust we saw, it wasn't that they were necessarily bad ideas, but the scale was wrong. So when you had something like pets.com, it was just way too much money. Or even Webvan. Webvan was actually a good idea, but it was just they spent way too much money too fast, too soon. They didn't grow organically. I think in today's market, the thing that I would see is the worst are just all the Me Too companies. It's like, 100 different companies saying, oh yeah, we're going to beat Google at the search engine. It's kind of silly. It's kind of like saying we're going to beat Microsoft at Windows. Yeah, it'll happen eventually. Linux has been working on it for 20 years. It's not going to happen overnight from some startup,
I see. Now, one last question. Which is the biggest flash in the pan of the Web 2.0 you saw during these years?
Well, I think it would be, as what I just mentioned, I think that, that Me Too search startups. Everybody sees what Google has accomplished and they say, oh yeah, we're going to be the next Google. And it's just not going to happen. I think people forget. I mean, particularly in an era of network applications, network effects rule. Network effects mean the good get better. The people who are the winners, get further and further ahead of the pack. And the downside of that is there really will be this consolidation I talked about earlier, and that's not a bad thing, because again, you look at the PC market. Are we really better off if we had thousands of different companies all offering the same kind of product? No. I don't want another social network. I want there to be one social network, right? I don't want another application to do exactly the same thing, and I have to choose, and my friends are on this one or they're on that one. Go forget it. Learn to interoperate. Learn to work together.
Thank you very much for joining us and for your answers.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
See you again.